Cape Town, South Africa, December 3rd, 1967. Brothers Chris and Marius Barnard and a dedicated cardiac team performed the world's first heart transplant. The news shook the world.
It was the biggest news event that ever came out of South Africa.
The recipient, Louis Waskanski. The donor, Denise Darvel. With a woman's heart beating in his chest, would he be different?
Are you fitting now, Mr. Waskanski?
I feel quite fine.
Now, 50 years later, we reveal a long-kept secret.
We've removed a beating heart.
Has credit been given where due?
Mr. Hamilton Naki, his official position is the laboratory attendant.
And finally, if the heart is just a pump, why does it mean so much?
The seat of love, the seat of life.
And we gave it one shot. Heart starts to beat like that.
I'll never forget Chris's words. It works.
How long did the operation take?
I don't know how long the operation took. I've got no clue when I even started.
Within 24 hours, this hospital was besieged with pressmen, and all of whom had flown from all over the world.
All the newspapers were here to take pictures, and we still didn't know why they were taking pictures of us. We'd only done a heart transplant.
Couldn't even get through the front door of the hospital because there were so many press people from all over the world. And that's when things really changed in our life drastically. And I always say, I think that day we lost my father to the world.
It was exciting, very exciting. It was really an unbelievable experience. I think at one stage I was probably one of the most popular people in the world. Not only amongst older people, not only amongst younger people, not only among white, black, yellow, about the whole spectrum of population of the world. And that evening, there was a television crew here to photograph the team and to discuss the operation with the team. And then after that, it just became impossible to work. I recognize what they wanted, but what I don't think they recognize is the need that I had to have time to look after my patients, to do my surgery, and that I couldn't spend all the time answering questions and appearing in front of cameras.
Nobody ever expected it to hit the media like it did. And then when we saw the papers the next morning with these big headlines, human heart transplant performed in Cape Town, we were really very proud and quite amazed at the stir it had caused.
To do a thing like this, you need a lot of research work, which we've done. You need a hospital where you can do big open heart operations, which we've done for the last 10 years. You need the nursing staff that can look after patients before, during, and after operations, which we have. You need a man like Duval, who's got the courage, or whatever it is, that a man like that needs at a time to give his daughter's heart, just after his wife has already been killed. We had a man like Waskanski that was keen to get better, to have confidence in us to do something for him. And then I think the final thing, you must have faith in yourself and faith in your God, and I don't think there's any problem in doing things like this.
Before his passing, Professor Marius Barnard asked his daughter Nordine to make a film in tribute to those involved in the operation that changed the world, and to clear the air of all scandal.
I don't think I'll be around at the 50th anniversary of the heart transplant, but maybe my story will be of interest to the people.
Beaufort West. In 1920 South Africa, Beaufort West was known for sheep farming, segregation and little else. Chris and Marius Barnard were born here, 4 years apart, to missionary parents.
I think to just underline the improbability of me and Chris being involved in the world's first transplant is just go back a little bit in our history. My grandparents were basically illiterate and worked in the nice enough forest, chopping down trees. And my father left home at 23 years of age because they didn't believe in education.
My father was a very human man, and I think that he taught his children how to work with human beings and how to appreciate the small things in life.
After his death in 2014, Marius's family went to visit the Barnard brothers' childhood home, now a museum, furnished much as it was when they were growing up.
Amazing. What humble beginnings.
I presume my father and his siblings were conceived right here, and they were born right here on this bed in this room.
Their eldest brother, Abraham, died when he was about 9 months old. He was a blue baby, the result of a hole in his heart.
That must have been the inspiration for my dad to become a cardiac surgeon. And he loved the babies more than anything else.
And she mourned about this child.
She couldn't get over his death.
All her life, yes. She just wanted to be buried next to him, which actually came true.
As the Reverend for the coloured community, my grandfather, he used to be called the Hotnotspredikant, which means the coloured minister. It's quite a derogatory term. His children, Chris, my father Marius, and Dotsli and Johannes were known as the Hotnotspredikants, Sekanders. Even in those days, being a white NKK minister or missionary, he certainly did not judge people by the colour of their skin, whether they were poor or rich. He always used to say, all our blood is red.
The brothers had very few possessions growing up and busied themselves by rolling old tires down a hill behind their house. Marius's enduring memory was of the windmill.
He called it the sunflower of the desert. When the wind changed direction, it would turn, always bringing up the water, because my grandfather loved his vegetable garden.
All the fruit trees were there, and Marius and Chris were allocated a tree each. Chris had the peach tree, which you can't see anymore, and Marius had the plum tree. He produced so many fruit that he could always take a little basket every day and sell it for pocket money.
I don't know whether you ever read that story about my mother and the plum tree.
No, I didn't.
No, you didn't?
No.
Well, we had a plum tree in our garden, and sometimes it was very full of fruit, and then branches would hang way down on the ground, you see. And my mother, when we had success at school and we were sort of full of ourselves about this, my mother always said, look, you must always look at that plum tree. When it's really full of fruit, its branches are low onto the ground, you see, and that's what you must do. When you really have success, then you must be down on the ground, not up in the air.
As I sit here in my father's home at Beaufort West, I just can't imagine what the vision was that he had. I can imagine him sitting as a little boy, looking up and thinking, I'm going to reach for the stars.
I couldn't take this little town with all its conservatism and bigotry and racialism. And I'll never forget leaving our house in February 1945 with a little tog bag on my shoulder, going to the University of Cape Town to start my medical career. It was about the biggest day in my life.
After obtaining their medical degrees at the University of Cape Town, both Chris and Marius spent time delivering babies in Cape Town's segregated township, District 6. This sparked a love for children, and it seemed inevitable that they would specialize in pediatrics. Remarkably, both had a change of heart that led them to cardiac surgery.
I came to America by a complete accident at the time when heart surgery started, and I went to the school that led the world in heart surgery.
Chris and Marius both studied under world leaders in cardiac surgery in the United States.
I worked with Dr. Bakey and Dr. Cooley. It was very important for me to get that American experience because it gives you a kind of a position above the others.
Because we were doing procedures on animals where we were able to stop the heart for longer and longer periods of time. So the idea finally developed that maybe we could stop it long enough to actually replace it, taking the heart out of one animal and putting in one from an animal of the same species.
The people who I think who helped me most is, of course, Professor Wagenstein, who was my head.
I did provide many of these people with opportunity.
Chris's mentor, Dr. Owen Wagenstein, helped Chris obtain US government funding to bring the heart-lung machine back to South Africa. On his return, Chris joined Professor Vel Schreerer's cardiac unit at Groote Hospital in Cape Town, where he developed a breakthrough heart valve.
We worked on the artificial valves, and we've had many problems with these valves, especially with the mitral valve, like everybody else. But gradually we managed to solve some of these problems, and today the results are pretty good with the replacement valves.
I came back in April 1967 to join my brother Chris in the cardiothoracic team.
After joining Chris's team, Marius was responsible for perfecting the transplant techniques on animals in the research laboratories.
These are the reasons why I felt we were ready to transplant the heart. Number one is that we've had 10 years of experience in major heart surgery. In addition, we had experience how to work the heart-lung machine. Thirdly, we had experience of how to look after a patient who's had major heart surgery.
We select patients who have reached the end of the road, so to speak. Patients who have severe heart failure with heart trouble. Patients who can no longer be held by conventional medical treatment.
53-year-old Louis Washkansky met all these criteria and was selected as the recipient of the first heart transplant.
My brother Sully was in the army with Louis. And the very first time I saw him was they came home on a visit. I can describe him. Dark-haired, twinkly blue-eyed, smiling, and my relationship with him from day one was very good. I could just relate to him right away. He was that kind of person. Basic, down to earth, friendly, kind.
I only have fond memories of him. He wasn't a large person, but he was very large in terms of his generosity, his jovialness, his love for his family. His family was very important to him. My mother then got divorced, and my uncle Louis kind of became my father figure. And he was a superb individual, absolutely superb individual, treating me as an equal son to his own. I only had one child.
And he had a terrific smile, and every paper, any report from all over the world always referred to Louis' lovely smile, and that he did have.
He got sick. He had a heart attack of what we know today as being a heart attack. That happened twice, and the third time he landed up at Groote Hospital.
The thing that impressed me that both Marius and Chris operated on people who were really sick. There was no question of gaining experience or anything. I mean, Washkansky was in a terrible mess. He was in heart failure. He had edema everywhere in his legs and his arms. He had great difficulty breathing.
It was perhaps not a good choice. Washkansky was not well. He had diabetes. He would be prone to infections because with immunosuppression you get infections very easily.
Louis told us about what Barnard was going to do. So I said to him, do you mean he's going to put a valve in? He says, no, not a valve. And he swore, he said, a bloody heart.
We thought they were going to put another heart on a heart. We never, ever thought that they were going to take the heart out. I mean, you can't live without a heart.
I tried very hard to stop him from having it. He couldn't wait to have it done, and he really thought this man was a genius.
The one thing that I knew I could do the operation.
We had the surgical ability. We had a unit that we can use as isolation unit. We had the team in place, the anaesthetists, the cardiologist. All we did now was to get a donor. Our first patient came about 3-4 weeks before we actually did the first heart transplant. It was a colored laborer who fell off a truck and had permanent brain damage. We had 2 theatres really, because you have to do this operation in 2 theatres, the donor team in the donor theatre, the recipient team in the recipient theatre.
And we waited and waited for the heart to stop. Chris and myself had a hell of a fight there, because I said, don't wait for the heart to stop, cut it out, because this person is dead. You're responsible for the recipient. Anyhow, we waited and waited, and the heart deteriorated, and we had to abandon the operation.
The idea of death those days, it sounds strange now, nearly 50 years later, that we were used to thinking of death when the person's heart stopped.
Which was nonsense. The person was dead. When his brain is dead, his heart can keep on beating for days afterwards.
Nobody asked questions when liver and kidney transplants were performed. It's only when the heart was transplanted that all the questions were raised, where the doctor's capability of diagnosing the moment of death was queried.
"25-year-old Denise Darvel and her mother Myrtle had stopped to buy a cake at a local bakery. What would have been an afternoon with friends ended in tragedy when both mother and daughter were struck by a drunk driver. Anne Washkansky was leaving Grooteskier Hospital a little way up the road after visiting her husband Louis.
As we were driving along, we saw a crowd of people in the distance and some police. I said, Grace, I think there's been an accident. And I saw there were 2 people lying on the ground. Little did I know the daughter was going to be the donor. It was an unbelievable coincidence that I should drive past at that moment.
Denise's mother was killed instantly, and Denise was declared brain dead. Edward Darvel was left with a difficult decision. He just lost his wife and was about to lose his daughter, but her heart could save a man's life. In the 4 minutes it took him to reach a decision, he thought only of Denise. If there was no hope for her, she would have wanted them to try save Louis Washkansky.
I was at home with my friends celebrating my wedding anniversary, so I was having quite a few glasses of red wine. And about 10:30 the phone rang and it was Chris.
I was with my mum, we were living in Rondebosch, and we got the call, and I said to Mum, gosh, this is it.
They said, we're doing a heart transplant. I said, what? And I fell out of bed. My wife woke up and said, what's going on here? So I said, no, nothing's going on. I have to go to the hospital.
When I went into the theatre, Teddy O'Donovan was already here and Denise Darvel was already lying on the operating table. She was declared brain dead.
The patient was intubated and was being ventilated on oxygen.
Until now, it was believed they had waited for Denise's heart to stop beating. In his final interview, Marius revealed a secret he'd managed to keep from his colleagues and the world for nearly half a century.
We waited and waited, and the patient started deteriorating, the donor, and I won the argument. We put the patient on bypass, cooled it down, and we removed a beating heart.
Immediately next door in the theatre was Dr. Hewitson preparing Dr. Washkansky's heart, and the surgeons obviously coordinated their movements.
We then transferred this heart to the operating room where we had the patient, and we immediately restart the perfusion of the heart of the donor. The one thing that sort of made me think of whether we were doing the correct operation was when I had my patient who I was going to treat and was going to save his life, when I had him lying there with a pericardial sac that was completely empty and no heart in it. I'd seen many open chests, but I've always seen a heart there.
And this is the first time that I saw a living human being without a heart.
I was leaning over the drapes and I looked inside where Chris and Marius were working, and I saw an empty heart. Now, an empty heart in a patient that was being kept alive by a heart-lung machine. And this really, I'd never seen anything like that, obviously, in my life.
And then the new heart being put in, and then the waiting to see, would it beat, would it not beat?
We applied the paddles to the heart, you know, from the defibrillator. We applied the paddles to the heart, and we gave it one shock. And on that shock, it was like switching on a switch. The heart just started to beat like that.
And Chris said, "Yes, het gaan werk."
I'll never forget Chris's words, "It works."
And I turned around to my technician, who's a very placid sort of boy, and I said to him, "Do you think it's going to work?" And he said, "Yes, I'm sure it's going to work."
From the silence and the holding of breath, everybody it was just a relaxing, you know, and we all sort of clapped, and I think we did, you know, hooray. It was so exciting.
Everybody started saying, "Oh, congratulations, Professor Barnard," and started smiling, and it was a very happy atmosphere.
And I looked that there was no bleeding there. And then at that stage, I thought now my assistants could now take over, you see, because all they had to do now is close the chest. So I then went out and had a cup of tea.
We sent the patient to the isolation unit, which was just a small ward.
Hi, Louis. Do you know what we did?
You promised me a new heart. Suppose you gave it to me.
Chris's contribution, obviously, the transplant was the crowning glory. But his real contribution to medicine, I think, was his post-operative care from the time the patient left theatre until the patient was well, which meant that he sat up all night with the patients in the intensive care ward. He was the father of intensive care in this country.
Chris was meticulous to the point of almost impossibility with his pre- and post-operative care. And although the operation is obviously very important, if you don't have good pre- and post-operative care, then the operation is a waste of time. When the first heart transplant was done, there wasn't any intensive care ward in the hospital. And I think because of the sterility that they would have had to make sure of and the general care for Louis Oskansky, they sectioned off a section of the ward so that it became virtually the first intensive care ward in the hospital.
This room was really properly washed down, everything washed down. Anybody who was nursing Mr. Oskansky had to have nasal swabs, rectal swabs, every type of swab to prove that you had no anything, bugs or... So we were all very monitored. Yeah, he was looked after.
We used to put a person in an oxygen tent, a kind of rubbery type of tent, and we pumped in oxygen and water vapor. We had no ventilators there that day.
Doc Marius, when I look at the nurses through this plastic, I can't see much.
Is there anything to see, Louis?
I'm sure there is, but I won't know until I've taken a good look.
They're all wrapped up anyway. That doesn't matter.
If I'm going to look, why should things be so blurry?
At 8:30 that Sunday morning, we left the hospital and it was all very quiet. And then later that evening, the media had got hold of it and the photographers were all over the hospital.
The world's first heart transplant has been performed. Medical history has been made in South Africa.
The streets were full, cameras, mics shoved all over. It was quite a shock, and nobody expected it.
The press intruded on our family. They camped outside the house. They waited there for my father to come or anybody to go out of the house, a bit like the film stars of nowadays. But my mother didn't enjoy it at all.
I thought, no, this is terrible. I just want to be me. I don't want to be a public property because we became public property.
People always ask me about how important we felt. Well, we felt so important that no photo was taken. We never thought it was worthwhile taking a photo. I was actually offered $1 million by American Journal for a photo as the heart was taken and put in the person lying, the human being lying without a heart. They wanted a photo, they were prepared to pay $1 million for it. Well, we never took this photo because we didn't think it was worthwhile.
Louis Washkansky's wife, Anne, hadn't seen him since the groundbreaking operation. He was the first man alive with a woman's heart beating in his chest. Would he be different?
Hey, kid.
She was so worried that he would have changed, that he would be not her Washi, you know, it would be somebody different.
But seeing Louis after the op was beautiful. Was just beautiful.
It's fantastic to see the man from kind of deathbed to sitting up in bed. And that face was the same face.
It was amazing to see how he lost all evidence of heart failure. The swelling of his legs disappeared, the swelling of his liver disappeared, his lungs became dry, and he was well, mentally well.
I was lucky enough to get a second chance, which very few people do.
He used to say to me, stick around, kid, I'll make you famous. Whether it was some sort of intuition or not, I don't know.
And what is the patient's condition now?
Very well.
There was photographers coming here and giving nurses money to take pictures of the patient and dressing up as doctors and trying to get in, you know. There was police standing on the doors trying to stop people coming in. I don't know how many television teams, and there they come on the television team. You've got an anchor person, you've got a camera operator, you've got a sound operator, you've got a light. You had 4 or 5 people from every team, plus photographers from all around the world. It became impossible.
Oh gosh, they would dress up as doctors in white coats and come sneaking along, trying to peer into the room. Eventually we had screens at either end of the ward just to stop them, and people standing guard. We had guards on the end to stop people coming in.
My father, Valshvero, he couldn't understand the excitement. He couldn't understand this fuss. And he just wanted to go back to normal.
It was just something that one can't imagine. These people, whoever they were, just took over. I don't know how they came so quickly to South Africa. They were just there. Everybody, the world and his wife.
I think people looked at it like as a symbol of hope, one man, you know, with all wars and things going on, and this is one man fighting for his life, and I think that they actually warmed to that.
How are you feeling now, Mr. Washkansky? I'm feeling quite fine. How do you feel about it, being such a famous man now?
I told you, I'm not famous, it's the doctor that's famous. It's the man with the golden hands.
The man with the golden hands.
My father, he always made you feel positive and have hope, and he was uplifting, and it was really gave you affirmation that things were going to be fine.
Even if you have to give a patient bad news, always put a bright side to it. Never totally destroy a patient by giving him the news of his illness. There must always be hope, because when there's hope, there's that fight for life.
Though the operation was considered a success, by day 5, Louis Washkansky's health took a downturn. Chris suspected Louis was rejecting the donor heart, but never once mentioned his concerns to Louis.
The side effects of the first heart transplant. We were forced into the media. Chris, of course, became a world-famous figure. Actually, I think enjoyed it.
I think that if the man who did the first transplant was, you know, fat and short with thick glasses and a bald head, he would probably not have made the same impression.
I felt very sorry for Maurice because he was the younger brother and he lived in the shadow of Chris. Chris got the glory, but he got the hard work.
I welcome this opportunity to have a talk to the public of South Africa and to introduce some of the members of the heart transplant team. I have Dr. M.C. Botha here, Professor Valshvero, Mr. Van Heerden operated the heart-lung machine. Dr. Ozinski was the senior anesthetist during the operation. Mr. Hewitson, a senior surgeon, was my right-hand man during the transplantation.
Chris was more a person that once he realised what the publicity is doing and the invitation he's getting, he realised that he must ride that and make sure he gets enough of it.
Louis's condition was rapidly deteriorating. His breathing became laboured and he was gasping for air.
We took an X-ray and there were some changes on the X-ray, and the cardiologist examined him and he said he thought he had a pneumonia, he had an infection in the lung. I did not believe that. I thought it was what we called in those days a transplant lung, but he did have an infection, and I made the biggest mistake there. For a transplant lung, you increase the drugs that stop rejection, where with an infection you would like to decrease it so that the body's resistance can overcome the infection. And what I did is I increased the drugs that stop rejection, and actually therefore made it much worse for him to fight the infection that he had in his lungs.
You didn't realise how much you could rely on rejection, what was not rejection. So it was really a learning period for us.
Louis, you must fight for us just for a little bit longer. Okay, Louis?
You know, we were so positive. We were so positive. He was doing so well, and we thought, gosh, this is really going to work. We so wanted him to live. It was sad to see him deteriorating, and he still stayed positive. He didn't ever say, well, this is it, I've had it, I'm finished. Never did that. Never told us that.
Louis, you said you had it in the bag, remember?
I was completely destroyed that morning. I went down to my office and I lay on the couch there, and one of my laboratory assistants came in and he saw I was crying. Because he was a very likable man, Mr. Woskansky. He was a very nice man. There was great sorrow that we let him down.
Well, I'll tell you, you might not notice that Chris is broken on account of this. Chris personally feels every patient that he looks after's death. To him, it's a major tragedy that any of his patients die. And that's the way we work in our unit, that every patient must live.
The measure of our sorrow is a token of the magnitude of our hope. We have earnestly believed, we had fervently prayed, we had hoped that he would live.
I don't know who all these hundreds and hundreds of people were that came to the funeral, other than news media and other. I don't even know who they were. You couldn't even get near the graveside.
In the wake of the transplant, Chris chose fame over family and would only feel the repercussions in his later years.
My father was very sad then because he'd gone through a third divorce. But the saddest thing ever was when he played Skip Score from David Kramer. And then he said, 'n stukkie lê hier en 'n stukkie lê daar, die stukkies van my lewe lê deurmekaar. And that was so sad because he said that was kind of, you know, this man that was world famous. And he was so lonely towards the end of his life. And he just talked about that, and we used to cry.
On the other hand, Chris's brother, Marius, had always shied away from the limelight.
Looking back now, I think my decision was right and his was wrong, because the media that built him up broke him down eventually too. And Chris died on his own on an island of Greece and Cyprus, very old, unhappy person. I'm still alive, just with a happy family. And I always think, Peter, people often say to me, how did you feel with Chris getting all the publicity and all that? I felt sorry for him, because he got hurt. I never got hurt.
Chris's family too was hurt.
I wrote a little short story about the influence of hearts in my world, and the heart has given us lots of joy and happiness, but it's also eventually shattered my mum's heart, broke my heart, and my brother's heart died.
Chris's son Andre died tragically in a bathtub at the age of 31.
And I'm quite sure that if there wasn't that breakup in the family unit, he would have had the moral strength to face everyday stresses of life.
In the wake of the apartheid regime, a rumor arose after an interview with laboratory assistant Hamilton Naki was misinterpreted by the media. The press caught wind of it and spread the idea that Naki was responsible for removing Denise Darwell's heart.
Mr. Hamilton Naki, he's been working here for approximately 9 years. His official position is the laboratory attendant. He's also an expert anaesthetist, and he's responsible for all the anesthetics given here in this laboratory.
I can't tell you how this happened. That is suddenly the world gets up and says Hamilton Naki was involved in the heart transplant.
The rumor started by a misunderstanding. I think Hamilton was asked whether he was part of the first heart transplant, and initially he answered yes, and I think what he implied was that he was part of the research in preparation for the first heart transplant. I think he then got cornered to say that he actually did the donor operation. And I think he kind of, maybe a language issue, went along with that story, and it then got propagated out of proportion.
Despite retractions issued by prestigious publications including the New York Times, The Economist, and the Associated Press, the rumor persists.
It's important that we don't think of Hamilton as a surgeon, because he did only have a standard 6 education. He was obviously very skilled in learning terms and learning anatomical situations, but he wasn't actually a surgeon. He was a surgical assistant.
Regardless of race and color, they wouldn't have allowed an unqualified person, not only not at such a momentous event, but at any level in Groote Hospital, because you've got to be qualified to do that kind of job. If you accord him the status of having done the transplant, you're actually stigmatizing him in a way. You're taking away his real life story, which is very valuable.
My family was very poor. I couldn't manage to go to school. I take standard 6. I came to Cape Town to look for work.
There was a position at the animal house at the medical school. So he applied for that, and he got the position there. He was very disappointed when he came to the animal house. He thought he was going to find cattle and goats and sheep there, and all he found was rats and mice and guinea pigs. But anyhow, he started working there, and he was not satisfied just to clean the cages of the animals. He wanted more than that.
He came to join our team, and he very quickly became my first assistant. I never remember him being away from work with illness or anything, even at the time when there were riots. And he always wore a suit, very neatly dressed with a hat, newspaper under his arm and an umbrella.
He was an exceptional technician. Hamilton could, on his own, without an assistant, do the dissection on the liver in preparation for a transplant. Anybody else would require an assistant to hold things out of the way, but Hamilton's hands were such that he could hold things out of the way himself and do the dissection.
News that is false is used as the norm, and I think that's what happened in terms of Hamilton. But he remained right up until his retirement a very stable, unassuming, undemanding gentleman.
What do you think of the future of heart transplants, Chris? Do you think they've got a future?
Yes, I'm
sorry, Marius.
No, that's all right. That's a mistake that's often been made.
Well, you look very much alike.
That's right. I'm the handsome one. No, if you ask me, what do I think of the future? The future must be terrific. I know this case we've just had hasn't ended up the way we would like it to have ended up, and I think you've seen our reactions about it. But as I said before, going up the slopes to the top of Everest, you get lots of bodies, and all this is, unfortunately, part of what we now know as progress.
Today, over 3,000 heart transplants are performed every year in the US alone. But a critical shortage of organ donors means many still die just waiting for a heart.
The heart is just a pump. The famous statement of Chris Barnard, which of course particularly 50 years ago shook the world for a second time.
Have I heard that in Cape Town, Dr. Barnard, there's a sign on that famous driveway where I'm supposed to be riding a bicycle once, which says, "Drive carefully, Dr. Barnard is watching."
That's correct. I think it's very difficult to look into the future, but one thing I can predict, that in 10 years' time, Dr. Harkin will be doing a heart transplant. He said, don't you feel bad that a patient's got to die before you can do a heart transplant? I said, well, tell me, did you ask the other surgeons whether they feel bad because a patient's got to die before they can do a liver transplant because they've just done a liver transplant also at the same period? They said, no. I said, what's the difference? I mean, you never query the death of the donor when you deal with other organs such as the liver and the kidney, but you always query the death of the donor when you deal with a heart transplant. And there's really no difference between the two. Well, they said, it's all this emotion and mystique about the heart. But I mean, I don't think that our scientific thoughts and judgments should be clouded by mystique.
When you get home tonight, say to the one you love, my heart belongs to you. It's quite a romantic, loving statement. And you feel warm and it's acceptable as something very special. If you go to your loved one tonight and try and say, my kidney belongs to you, you most likely will get a slap through your face.
In the Bible, the heart is mentioned, I think, 800 times in the Bible. The kidney around about, I think, 27 times. And the lung is never mentioned once in the Bible. Yeah.
So the heart transplant became important not because of the surgical medical breakthrough, but if the emotional part of it being the heart, the seat of love, the seat of life, the seat of religion.
As you know, there's a lot of competition between Professor Barnard and several people in the United States. Working now in the United States, I travel around, I give lectures and seminars. I always ask the question, so where was the world's first heart transplant done? And almost every American says, Texas, California, Philadelphia, and they need reminding who Professor Barnard is and where it was. That was history, real history.
I think you've met us now, we're ordinary guys. There's nothing about us that's superlative, and we know heroes. I think that what made the first heart transplant was just that we are doctors and we try to save a human being's life, and I don't think there's anything special about it.